SLU International Business Now, Conversations That Matter is a podcast developed by the Boeing Institute of International Business in St. Louis University's Chaffetz School of Business. Special thanks to founder Dr. Sung Kim for his grant to support the launch of this podcast.
Well, Elzandi, welcome to the Boeing Institute and our International Business Conference. It's great to have you here today. I have to say, before we get started with all of the Agtech conversation, I'd like to talk a little bit about your background and your path forward from being a math instructor to becoming a senior vice president at one of the largest global corporations based in Germany.
First of all, thank you for having me. I'm very humbled and feel honored to be here. My career path is, to say the very least, very unexpected and unpredictable, the way that it worked out. What I can say is, since early childhood, I love mathematics, I love science. That's what I was good at. Living and growing up in a country, a third world country, where poverty is a very real thing that you see everywhere, every day. The definition of poverty and helping people is very different from what the average United States citizen think of when they think about poverty. And I have a personal passion and desire to touch people's lives and make a difference. So that's how I found my path into the plant breeding. But while I was a student, I had to earn money to pay the student debt. And it was very easy to become a math tutor and science tutor to help pay the bills. And that's how I found my path into teaching while I was still studying. The only thing that I would add to that is, while I was teaching, I was helping Monsanto on one of their research farms with a double haploid breeding program. And while I was working with these breeders, I realized I don't want to be a scientist. I'm very interested in it and I'm finishing up my breeding degree, but I actually want to be on the business side. And the reason for that is my love for people. I want to work in teams. I want to inspire people, have a big stretch goal with a lot of pressure, and then go chase it down. And that's how I sort of found my path into the business side of the conversation.
In your current role, you're part of the strategy team for crop sciences. Can you talk a little bit about how crop sciences fits into the overall Bayer portfolio and some of the decisions you all are involved in?
Yeah, maybe I should take a step back, because many people, when they think about Bayer, they think about the pharmaceutical or maybe the consumer health side of the business. So for the company, the global company, we have three pillars. We have consumer health, which is your typical Barocca or the things that you can buy over the counter. Then we have our pharmaceutical business, and then we have crop science. And after the Monsanto acquisition, which I think most people is not even aware of, the crop science is actually larger than 50% of the company's revenue. So it's the biggest portion of the company. And it was a big vision to bring the different components of ag input into one business and one group of people. And that's how we ended up in the place where we ended up and where we are today.
Got it. Our conversation today should focus on accelerating change through global connectivity. I can't think of a better connectivity and accelerating change than the Bayer-Monsanto merger. Can you talk a little bit about what bringing those two companies together created in terms of accelerating the change and accelerating the capabilities at those two companies once they were working together?
So I'm from Legacy Monsanto, and I was in corporate strategy when the merger was negotiated. In fact, I'm sure all of you will remember, we, as Monsanto, pursued Syngenta before we ended up with Bayer, and that thing didn't work out. But the strategy and the idea was, we sort of reached the point where we're starting to slow down to bring real breakthrough innovation if you focus only on the seed and trade side of ag innovation. And we recognized very quickly we can solve for it through collaborations and through partnerships, but you slow down your pace if you can't bring the scientists much earlier on in the discovery exercises around one table to join forces. And it's very familiar. It was focused on our weed management system that we had, where plants can spray the herbicides on top of it. If we can bring the science much earlier on, then we can go much faster. So that was the idea from the Monsanto side. And then we had this huge desire to move away from just thinking about a standalone product where you're providing a farmer a solution, but you're providing them a solution to only a small fraction of the things that they face with on a daily basis. So we want to be a real partner that understands every decision that they have to make on a daily basis that eventually ends up in our plates. And to do that, we need to have a much larger portion of the different components in the toolbox that help them solve for these problems. So that's what took us there. When we started having the conversations with Bayer, it turned out they had the same strategy.
When you look at your particular group, the corn product team, who are the customers that you all are producing both the technology but also the products for?
Yeah, this is an interesting question. And you get different answers depending on who you speak to. But I can tell you, our customer is the farmer.
Okay.
There's many layers depending on which country you look at and where you do business in between us and the farmer. And in some instances, and that's why we pursued the digital route, we have to find a way to support our customer in a much more efficient way in the sense of providing them insights that can lead to better decision-making, timely decision-making, and ultimately improve their profitability. And we have to work through all these layers to reach a farmer because no one company can afford enough feet on the ground to just go directly. But we think about a farmer, and in my corn product team, our jobs is we sit around the table, and my team consists out of people from research and development, from product supply, from commercial, there's strategy people, finance people. So it's people from across the world, across the company, sit around the table, and I'm going to oversimplify it, but it really boils down to we decide we want to be in the corn business in the United States. And we list all the challenges and questions and things that a farmer have to deal with if they want to raise corn. And from there, we will go and we will say, which of these problems do we believe our technology can help them solve? And we prioritize those problems. And we will even decide what would be the ultimate or first preferred solution. Is it a seed and traits product? Is it a chemistry product? Or is it simply providing them insights and helping them to analyze the data that they collect along the way? And then we will turn around with the R&D organization and say, okay, this is our list of priority. Now let's bring that pipeline to commercialization.
You mentioned the farmer is your customer. Do you get to meet the customer? You personally?
I do. So I grew up on a farm. So that's the best part of my job. And in fact, every job that I had across the 20 years that I've been with Monsanto and Bayer now, my favorite part of my job is to go out to the field. When I travel to a different country, for example, typically I will spend 1 or 2 days in meeting rooms with the local team, but the other 3 days is in the field with farmers in the local communities, meeting with retailers, meeting with other stakeholders in the industry that's providing parts of the solutions that we don't have. So I speak to farmers very often, and it's definitely the best part of my job.
So you talk to U.S. farmers,
yes,
but you also talk to farmers in other countries. Do you find the reaction and the interaction with farmers in other countries is different than what you see when you go talk to farmers in the U.S.?
I wouldn't say the reaction is different. And I can say, growing up on a farm, when I sit in Iowa in front of a farmer, other than them frowning, trying to understand my strong accent, it looks and feels like my uncles and my dad and my family members. It's the same conversation. It's the same challenges. It's the same needs. Now, that being said, I have to differentiate between smallholders and bigger commercial farmers. And it's not because the needs are different, but the priorities of the needs change. In smallholder environments, there's a lack of ecosystems. There's a lack of financing. So yes, they want the bigger input solutions, but there's other things that's more important because they can't breach those hurdles and actually get to making the decisions of growing the crop. But the reaction is very similar. All farmers around the world want as much help and technology to do it in a more efficient way. And they all sit with the same challenges. The arable land is limited. They all face different circumstances. Climate change is a big factor. The other thing that I would say is if you go outside the United States, the sense of urgency for technology change, because those farmers don't have the support systems that the United States farmer have. They don't have the risk mitigation always. And South Africa is a really good example. The circumstances in which those farmers grow their crop, they're very similar to US farmers. They adopt all technology as fast as they can, but they're much more dependent on the technology because of the environment in which they farm. Their water resources is less, their soil quality is not as good as you find in many places where crops are grown in the US.
So you talked about back at your office, sitting and contemplating what's needed. Do you find yourself thinking there are different solutions needed for the US versus internationally, or does that collective, here's what farmers around the world need, kind of boil to the top?
This is a tough one to balance because as a company, we also have limited resources.
Yes.
So we try to solve for more custom-made solutions through partnerships, but it's not always easy. And then you all obviously deal with the regulatory systems as well. Europe and US is an easy comparison. GMOs is not allowed in Europe. Now gene editing is hopefully going to open up a new avenue for us. But even if I compare countries that do allow the latest and the greatest technology, you have different needs in the sense of what pests are they dealing with? What weed issues do they struggle with? So we don't always have the option of finding one or two solutions that will serve it all. And the further we get into it, the more complex it becomes. But we're trying to find the sweet spot between really customizing the solution that addresses that customer's needs combined with what can we afford. So it's a little bit of both.
So culturally, you see some differences and some focus differences, but ultimately you come to a combined answer of looking for where you're going to go. You manage a diverse team, which means you've got cultures around the world that you're dealing with, not just customers around the world you're dealing with. Can you talk a little bit about the differences you see in managing people from different cultures, different backgrounds?
Yeah, once again, I'm going to probably oversimplify it, but let me explain a little bit more about how I personally think about this. When I entered sales in Monsanto in South Africa, I was the first female in agriculture for Monsanto entering in the sales organization. So from my very early start, I was sort of the one standing out, the only female with 150 men, much younger than many of my peers. And now I'm a scientist, they're all sales professionals. So they frown upon you. When you come into the room, they're thinking, what is this lady doing here? And does she even know what she's doing? When I came to the United States and I managed the Iowa region, I think those farmers were thinking the same thing. This woman can't properly speak English. What is she going to teach us about corn and soybeans? And little did they know, that's one of the few things that I know very well is corn and soybeans. But it taught me a different way of approaching diversity. It doesn't matter whether you come from a different culture or you're the one that for some reason is different than anyone in the room. The reality is whoever selected the person for that role saw something that you bring, value that you bring to the table, that the others around that table, they cannot fill in. And your job is just to understand what is their value that they bring, where are their gaps, and how does your strengths fit into that holistic strength of the team. And that's exactly what I did and what I did with my own people. When I built the team, I don't care where they come from. I don't care what language they speak. What I care about is what are they good at? What did they master to the point where they got? And what are they really bad at? And how is those two components going to fit into the bigger team? And as soon as you switch focus from what is their background or do they look the same or not, then the whole diversity topic goes away. You have them there for a reason. If you can help the team understand that, they will go after the value that that person brings to the table. That being said, the culture of the company is very important because if others is not open to that way of thinking, you can stand on your head, you can do whatever you want. It's not going to work. There have to be a culture that really embrace and value diversity for that to come to the front, and it has to start from the top.
Through your career, you've had a lot of different opportunities to lead people. And I imagine you have personal strengths that helped you in that process, but also probably faced some challenges along the way. What can you look back on and say, what helped you become the leader that you are? What were some of the things, both positive and perhaps challenging, that made you who you are today?
I think for me, the biggest thing to overcome was to get comfortable with my weaknesses. So I think about each and every one of us. We have strengths, we have development areas. Those are the weaknesses that you can actually do something about. And then you just have those things that's part of the package and it's never going to change. Especially if you're the one standing out in the team, your critiques is going to look for those weak spots and they're going to shine the light on it. And early on in my career, I really struggled with that. I didn't know how to deal with it. I'm an overperformer. I'm someone that highly function under stress. The further you pull me, the better I do. But suddenly I was distracted with these people that's actually there to justify why I shouldn't be there. What do I do with this? I'm good with people. I get along with people. I focus on building strong relationships. But if you don't figure out how to deal with that component, you run into walls. So what I learned, and I've been blessed with great mentors and coaches along the way, and it's actually one of my mentors that helped me got to the point where I realized the first thing that I do when I get into these new groups, I identify my biggest critiques and I build a relationship with them. But I built the relationship to figure out what are they struggling at and how can I help them? How can I use my strengths to help them overcome some of the things that they're struggling with? As soon as you focus on that and not to take the credit for it, but to show that person that together the two of you can actually go further, then they become supporters. So I would say I struggled with being comfortable with the reality of my own weaknesses. And it took me a little bit of a journey to get to the point where I actually started believing, you know what, there is no better thing than negative feedback. If you get the negative feedback, you can do something about it. If you don't get it, it's going to bite you in a way that you're not even going to be aware that it's to your jeopardy.
So live with the limitations you've got, but don't miss out on the opportunity to advance, because those are the places where you might be able to make the biggest advances.
And understand how your strengths is actually going to help you overcome whatever it is that you have to live with.
Perfect. So talking about mentoring, you mentioned mentoring. I know you're a big proponent of STEM, and you have two daughters who are launching off in science-oriented careers. What would you say to folks in our audience? Not everybody here is an Agtech professional, but there are folks here that are students, some people that might be thinking of Agtech as the future career path, but they don't have that STEM background or the STEM strength out there. What advice do you have for them in terms of how to go about getting engaged in this Agtech opportunity that we see growing in front of us?
So there's a few components to your question, Gene. The first one is many people think about agriculture as old school or slower than other industries. Many females in sales, for example, commercial, do not want to go into agriculture. They think there's other industries that's much fancier than agriculture. And what I want to say to them is they're completely wrong. It is what you make of it. There are incredible industries that's highly technical, science orientated in agriculture, but it depends on what you as an individual seek to do. The second thing that I would say is I don't think there is a better customer base than agriculture. It's the salt of the earth. And I sincerely believe that every society's foundation is laid on the agricultural industry. And the last thing that I would say is anything that anyone study at any college has application in agriculture like it does in any other industry, because each of these corporations have opportunities that fits into any discipline. The one that I would say, and it doesn't apply to just agriculture, it's sort of how I went about my own career. I like and I seek roles where at least 50%, if not 60% of the job, I had no qualification, I haven't done it before, and I had no idea how I'm going to do it. But what I did know is, why do I want to do it? What is it that I'm going to learn from this opportunity? So whenever I was in the interview and the hiring manager was probably thinking, what is she doing here? Why does she want me to hire her? I was able to explain, what is it that I'm going to get from this role? And what is the value that I'm going to immediately add to the role? And by doing that, I never interviewed and didn't get the job. Every job that I interviewed for, I got, and I kept to my promise. I learned fast. I surrounded myself with brilliant people, and I learned from them in order to deliver on that promise. And I would say that to anyone that's early on in their career or just seek a change. Don't underestimate yourself. If there's something that you believe, that you feel passionate about, and you want to do it, show other people why you are the right choice for that role.
Before we wrap up, Elzandi, let's open it up to the audience and let them ask a few questions, and then we'll come back to you.
Sounds good.
All right. Anybody in the audience have a question for us?
First of all, thank you very much for sharing your journey, and especially on diversity and leadership. I think all of us can take something away from that, and sometimes venturing off into the unknown. My question is, though, a little bit more on the technology side. If you think about the last decade, what technology do you think had the biggest impact on Agtech in getting us where we are today and contributing towards the future?
In my view, it's GMOs, biotech, and what it's done from all angles. Many people confuse what biotech did for production, for yield increase versus breeding. And it's a combination of both, because the one complemented the other. But that in combination and the strategy that there was to bring biotech into breeding and combine it from a seed viewpoint was revolutionary. It really changed, and you look at the yield curves. Exactly the promise when this all started, we will double yields, we will triple yields. It happened. And in the countries where we're only taking biotech into now, that haven't used these technologies for their farmers for the past 2 decades, we're still seeing it. You double yields immediately by bringing these solutions to farmers. If I look at the future, I think the next revolution is going to come with gene editing. Now, I just hope that we will have freedom to operate and that all the countries around the world will see the opportunity that we have. And this is not just for ag. I sincerely believe this is going to change many scientific fields and how we solve for problems.
Thanks.
I have a question in the morning about China. So I'd like to hear now, you've been to Asia, you come back. What is the Asians' view, or being as the Singapore Indian or China, about the United States in terms of technology innovation, IP protection, even what is the best way to communicate and lead in business? What's the Asian perspective, as you now have made your tour there and are coming back? Thank you.
Thank you for the question, Linda. So I lived 4 years in Singapore, and before I moved to Singapore, I was marketing and market development lead for our Asia Pacific business. I was part of the Eisenhower Fellowship, and I traveled China for 5 weeks. And mostly what I did there, I met with government officials, with companies in the ag industry. And the question was, in their 5-year plan, China have declared they want to advance agriculture technology to make their farmers more profitable and successful. And my question to them was, what does this mean? Do you want multinational companies to bring their technology here? Will you adhere to global business rules and respect IP? And so those were the type of conversations that we had. So I have a lot of appreciation for China. I think I had significant exposure. To your question, if you ask what is the Asian perception, Asia is very complex and very different. So depending on which country you refer to, you're going to get a different answer. India will have a very different response to how they think about China and China's leadership versus the United States. And if you ask one of the Southeast Asian countries, you're going to get a different response. What I would say is most people that I interact with underestimate the rate at which China advances from a technology viewpoint. They underestimate how fast that country achieve whatever goal they set out to achieve. Another thing that I would highlight is the fact that whether we agree with the political system and approach or not, the reality is they have a 5-year plan. That 5-year plan is being revised in detail constantly, and they have a constant leadership that don't change every 5 years. The only thing that they do is they improve on the things that they've learned in the past 5 years, and they throw all their efforts at achieving that plan. And they make significant progress at a rate that we cannot wrap our minds around. And I personally fear that we underestimate how fast they move. Drones is a really good example. When they decided they want to get into the drone technology, there were 2 startup companies that had 800 engineers working 7 days a week around the clock, building drones. The technology moved so fast. Many other countries have options that's equal, that's on par, but I would doubt that they're moving faster than China because they throw the resources at it. So what I would say is I don't think we fully understand the capabilities, and I don't think we fully understand how fast they move when it comes to technology, not just in agriculture, in all industries that they prioritize.
Thank you for your insights. My question has 2 parts. The first part is what's an advantage that Bayer has been able to capture being part of a thriving Agtech ecosystem? And my second part is what's the advice that you can give for Agtech startups in this ecosystem?
That's a good question. And I think the Bayer people in the room might have different opinions on this. But for me, that has crossed over between strategy, where I did quite a bit of joint venture initiatives, out-licensing, in-licensing, and R&D. I think the biggest advantage of being in St. Louis that becomes the Silicon Valley of ag technology is the fact that as soon as there's something new that many times get lost in a big corporation, where you have competition for resources, you have things that you need to maintain, especially if you're a leader in an industry. Some of these new, creative, really innovative projects get lost in the bigger scheme of things. And having a community that's focused on this makes the world of a difference. Pairwise is a really good example. When gene editing started, we were right in the middle of that acquisition negotiation. It's a new technology. We all know the potential that it brings, but it's hard to prioritize it in the bigger scheme of things. And that's how Pairwise started. It was sort of a spin-off. It was legacy Monsanto people. We had a very strong collaboration with Pairwise, and now we have a strong company that's partnering with many more stakeholders in the industry. So my advice to new startups would be really think about how can you solve for these problems that bigger corporations cannot do for whatever reason, and then build those strong partnerships where you benefit from the big engine, from the big corporation, but you still bring your expertise and find the right timing to hook yourself on and benefit from the bigger footprint. I think that is, if you look at startups that's successful and the ones that's slower to get out the blocks, it's a timing question. And who is the partner that complements them and their technology to the most?
Hello, my name is Charity Way. I'm an engineer. I'm an aerospace engineer, worked for NASA, did some satellite work, and then at Boeing now doing some fighter program. I want to transition into this, coming here, learning, and I'm Nigerian also. So all through, I've not heard any African country mentioned. What are you doing? And I mean, it's a vast land and there's a lot of nutrients, right? So have Bayer done anything? Are you investing? Are you into the communities? And if so, can you tell me more? And also, like you said, I don't know much about agriculture. Like I learned so much today that I've ever learned. What advice can you give me for somebody who might go interview and doesn't know 60% of that job? What kind of advice can you give me as I, shown some interest into getting into this field?
Yeah, that's a good question. So to your first part of your question, what have we done? We've focused in Africa. It's very different from in Asia. In Asia, we already have quite a strong ecosystem. We have a strong network through which we can work to reach the farmer. There's several layers in between, but we can go direct. In Africa, we had quite a bit of regulatory stumble blocks to cross. So we did it through partnerships. The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation were our partner in Africa. And now, after decades, we're making significant progress. There's multiple countries in Africa that's now coming along and embracing technology that really can make a difference for their farmers. So we absolutely believe the next phase of growth in ag is going to come in the smallholder communities. That's also the next phase where the unlocked opportunity are of optimizing the arable land that's maybe not fully unlocked yet. The challenge, though, is, and this is just my personal opinion, in Africa, in many of these countries where you have highly productive soil that we can still optimize, you don't necessarily have the ecosystem in place. The ecosystem needs to come along, and in many of these countries, the cultural component also needs to come along. There needs to be a desire to optimize yield and production and not just do it whenever the need are there. And I'm hoping that when the ecosystem comes along, they see the financial benefits, then it will solve for that. To your question around how do you enter an industry where you don't have the background? You come with a wealth of science background. That's what you need to focus on when you enter that industry. Learning about plants and learning about farmers, that is the easy part. Your education and your background, that is a really tough one to learn and replicate, especially if you come from a STEM field. You can go from STEM into any direction. You can go into HR, you can go into finance, you can do anything that your heart desires, but you can't always go from business into a science field, because that's less reliant on your personality and your people skills. It's really an education that gives you that foundation. So my answer to you as an individual is, take my number, I can help you with that.
First of all, great presentation. I really enjoyed it. In the last 40 or 50 years, there's been a steady erosion in the confidence in science and scientists. Bayer is an organization that's based on science and good scientists and is filled with scientists. Unfortunately, scientists are not always the best at being able to convince folks. And in fact, we've seen today the data shows that the more facts and data we use, people become more entrenched. How do we finally start to bridge that divide and bring us back to a world where science and facts and data can help persuade people and help them understand the vital importance of the work that you and your team members do?
That's the million-dollar question. If I reflect back on the Legacy Monsanto journey, that's probably one of the things that we failed in Legacy Monsanto. And I'm saying we, I was stewardship lead in Africa, in Europe, Africa, where I had to explain to average people what is GMOs and why do we say it's safe. And I thought I had the perfect explanation, but I always went about it from a scientific viewpoint. The reality is the average mom out there that doesn't have a science background, she's not interested to understand GMOs. The only thing that she cares about is that she feels good about the plate of food that she puts in front of her children. And that's what matters. So my answer to your question is, I don't know how we get general public educated, fact-orientated, and willing to spend the time to learn more.
So, Elzandi, you definitely have energized the audience here. I think we've got time for one more question.
Thank you for a wonderful talk. I'm faculty here, and because I'm a scholar, I really wonder how I'm curious about how the company views the potential impact of climate change on their corn, for example, corn product sales, research and development, something, etc. So I'm really wanted to listen to the real corporate world scene. Yeah.
Yeah, so climate change is for us a reality that our customers deal with on a daily basis. And every conversation that I'm in, I spoke to South African farmers this morning, they're having a drought, but they feel the impact of the low commodity prices even worse than the North American farmers because they sit on the other side of the world, they don't have insurance, don't have subsidies, and now they have a drought. So the seed that's in the ground is a problem. How do we approach it at Bayer? We have switched our strategy to focus on regenerative ag. Now, this is a very fancy word, and depending on who you ask, they're going to give you a different explanation. But let me give you a very simplistic explanation of how we at Bayer think about it. And we don't offer this yet, but this is what we are developing as we speak. We have short stature corn that we took the corn plant and we made it 30% shorter. Everything else about the plant is the same. We just shortened the internodes in between, and that made us a shorter plant. Why did we do this? Because of the hurricanes and the strong winds, farmers struggle with standability. What we're seeing is the root system develop different. There's more root mass, it goes deeper, it goes wider. So we're working to understand what does this mean from a water utilization, fertility utilization viewpoint. I don't have the answers yet. At the same time, we're not focusing on the corn plant on its own. We've invested in cover cress where we're looking at what do you do from pennycress viewpoint. It was a gene-edited crop. Now they can plant it in between the seasons of their crops, and they do everything that we want from a regen viewpoint, and the farmer have an additional revenue stream because it goes into the biofuel system. And then if you overlay that with the new technology on our next gen soybeans, you can have 3 crops in 2 seasons, and all 3 crops preserve water, it use less resources while you do it, and it's an additional income for the farmer. So that's how we at Bayer think about how to contribute to the challenge that we have from a global viewpoint when it comes to climate change.
Elzandi, thank you very much. We wish you the very best for the future with accelerating the changes that are out there. For our audience, thank you very much for your attention and your enthusiasm. This has been a great conversation and appreciate your participating in it.
Thank you for tuning in to the SLU International Business Now Conversations That Matter podcast. We invite you to subscribe to this podcast series so you don't miss any future episodes. To learn more about the Executive Master of International Business program, please visit biib.slu.edu. Again, that's biib.slu.edu.